Hi, you came back. I'm so glad you did. Welcome to a recap of GraceLogic Systems Clarity Series, Episode 01A, Part 1. I'm Carrie L. And in the first part of the episode, you got to meet me, but more importantly, you started a journey. Now, it doesn't seem like much right now. It's hard to imagine the new house when you barely started pouring the foundation. Let's talk about the progress you've made in just the 30 minutes you've shared with me, though. And hopefully I left you a little intrigued. I told you that I had placed you into 3 different patterns, and I have. And we'll continue to build on that. But first, welcome to my tea party. What? Oh, Ezra is telling me that's out of sequence is too soon. Okay, ignore that reference until you've had a chance to view the therapist role segment in part 3. In the meantime, let's find out what you've already figured out. Ta-da! Look what you've started already. I told you it wasn't a waste of time. In just a partial episode, you've gotten those critical thinking muscles off to a brilliant start. Our themes from part 1, we've opened up concepts about patterns, thinking, reasoning, words and intent, self-awareness and our default settings. We've talked a lot about truth, putting it in the center and realizing that self-honesty is the only way through to clarity. Oh, you haven't realized that yet. Okay, a fact is truth, but not the total truth. We'll work on your understanding. We talked briefly about our feelings and control, and we opened up the idea that the expectations we create within ourselves may be causing us grief. Wait, what? Really? That's interesting. Something we'll explore more as we progress. So we started this whole thing off, and be honest, a lot of you probably clicked on the video because of the title, I See Patterns. The ability to see patterns is part of our DNA, and we've been developing pattern logic all of our lives. A small but powerful conditional logic pattern you use every day, if then else. For example, if it doesn't rain today, then I'll cut the grass, else I'll wait till later this week. Another pattern you may recognize is the organization chart. This represents a hierarchical reporting relationship, or how communication should flow up or down a certain chain of command. Patterns repeat and are consistent, and our brains lean on them for recognition and structure. Take into consideration the pattern that the calendar represents in time and expectation. And here, the human face. Did you know that the pattern of the human face is the most recognizable? Our brain is wired so strongly to recognize faces that sometimes it sees them when none exist, in clouds and shadows and abstract shapes. Sometimes it only takes 2 dots in a line. That's how tuned in we are to a pattern. Patterning isn't new. What's new is making it intentional, a conscious practice, built so anyone can use it to reframe the way they think, reason, and grow their understanding. It helps break apart what people already do unconsciously so they can do it deliberately and with clarity. So back to the recurring themes, thinking and reasoning. For thinking, you should have in the forefront of your mind that there's more than one way to think about a thing. You can also think at it, you can think around it, you can think through it. What? Oh, we haven't talked about through yet. Okay, too soon, but it's on the board now and we'll come back. Now, reasoning, remember when I told you I wrestled with myself about whether to share my professional background? That was me naming an act of reasoning, not showing you the reasoning itself, and that's an important difference. One reason I wanted to show you this segment was to demonstrate how reasoning can and should shift when you let new information in. When you have to reformulate a thought you assumed was already sealed as truth. A different angle, a new piece of data, and suddenly you see fresh insights. And it's okay to change your mind, especially when the truth didn't change. What changed was your perspective based on new and relevant data that rightfully caused it to shift. Did you catch that? I'm not saying I was right or wrong in the result. I'm saying that from a reasoning perspective, it was a valid act. Oh, and did you also catch that I switched to the survivalist avatar when I was doing the reasoning? Reasoning only through one lens has its flaws, and we'll unpack more about reasoning from the survivor perspective in greater detail in episode 03A. And apologies to the podcast listeners because I didn't point that out in the audio. Yeah, that whole not offering perfection thing is so real. Anyway, bottom line, my reasoning there wasn't great, and even that is useful because it shows why reasoning has to show up in different ways at different times. And words matter. They build meaning and they shape expectations. Intent is the part of you that no one else can own. It directs the meaning of your words and actions. People may misread it, they might twist it, or project onto it, but your intent remains yours. That's why I call intent the measure of a man. Words, intent. We started with the foundation for how you view intent and how that intent may be received differently than how it is meant. That words don't just sit there. They carry intent, and the received intent is not always aligned and can sometimes be twisted into things like offense. Okay. And then we talked about our default settings, right? Default settings, that was a sneaky one. That first calibration showed you what your default might be when you start thinking about a thing. And mum's the word, is prepping you for our soul skills segment later, when we'll talk about emotions and what drives us. This one was setting markers for empathy and compassion. Facts as a truth, we touched on this too. Facts are important, but truth isn't about a single fact. It's bigger than that. Truth is what anchors us so that facts don't get stacked incorrectly or out of order and turned into distortion. And feelings, real, yes. Valid, yes. Instinctual, most of the time, but not the drivers of your life. They can be managed. They can be guided by your thinking. We touched briefly then on expectations. We started that thread too. Expectations can pin you down, even your own expectations of yourself. Now, assumptions, not so much, not yet. Maybe I'll call in the therapist later for that one, because we all know what assumptions do. So those were our themes. We started threading in part one, not just ideas, but the starter bricks. Next, let's look at how they settle into truths. Okay, mind truths, things we should know, yes? Let's walk through them. Your mind is yours. Ownership. My mind is mine. Yours is yours. You control it. The best others can do is influence it. And the best you can do is to reason to maintain its integrity. Your mind is complicated. It isn't just linear. There's more than one way to think about a thing. At, about, around, and later we'll add through. Each lane reveals a different angle. And while it's working, the mind is doing more. It builds meaning from words and shapes expectations and carries intent. Here's another sneak peek at intent. We talked about how it doesn't always arrive intact on the other side. Well, sometimes we may not even be aware of our true intent, our own true intent. Surprising, huh? No? Not to me either. Feelings. They're real, they matter, but they don't have to run the show. With practice, they can be managed without leaving bruises on you or on others. Did I say that right? Or on others. Yeah. And all of this is based on our own truth, our mind's truth. what we know, what has meaning, and what we choose to believe. That frame, those three things, sits around every other brick we will place. And let's not forget what we talk about. When we talk about the mind, we must also talk about mindfulness. So let me put it this way this time. Have you ever watched a movie, maybe more than once, and something that you see or something that somebody says makes you look at all or part of that movie in entirely a different way? And you go, oh, of course, duh. Well, that's what it means to use patterning. It might just be the simplest things. What you've seen, what you already know, what you're not paying attention to, that makes the biggest difference. And as we round out this recap, let's take a look at some comments that might have occurred. Yeah, okay, who am I kidding? They didn't occur. Ezra made them up, well, at least this time. Let's see them. So, trying to take everything into consideration, I will always try to finish off a recap by answering some comments. And because I had no comments to discuss, I had Ezra create some. These are from partially distorted lenses, the lenses of rejection, cynicism, and pragmatism. They're an externalized triad. We'll talk about them more when we talk about emotions. But let's see if you can tell which questions may evolve from those distortions. Oh, and before we do that, let's look at some origin definitions. So cynicism, it's an inclination to distrust, I can't say it. It's an inclination to distrust motives, assuming actions are driven by self-interest. Pragmatism is a habit of judging ideas or actions by their practical effects and usefulness. And then finally, rejection is the act of dismissing or refusing something as unwanted, invalid, or not acceptable. Okay, so now we have a handle on that. Let's take a look at the comments. First comment, this feels like overcomplicating basic ideas. Well, it's not complication, it's focus. Prism clears the noise so your mind builds meaning from the right data. That data that you know that has meaning or that you've chosen to believe. So data that is anchored in truth. Next comment. Why not just give me quick steps instead of all of this? Well, shortcuts only work if you know the rules behind them. Prism gives you the guardrails. The patterning gives you the guardrails. So your shortcuts don't collapse. Yes, there will be shortcuts you can use later, but we have to go the long way first. The next comment, well, she's just talking about herself. It isn't for me. Well, the stories are scaffolding. Windows, mirrors, feelings, emotions, and struggles hold true across generations and cultures. You know that. They're not just mine. They're patterns we all share. In the final comment, this feels uncomfortable, maybe even a little judgmental. Well, of course, it isn't easy. Growth rarely is. But discomfort isn't judgment. It's the signal that you're pushing into new ideas, forming new insights, building clarity. And that makes it worth it, because you're worth it. Part 2 is on the way. See you soon. Oh, I wasn't supposed to say anything here. The end.